This is part 13 of Angular CRUD tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss Angular ngif structural directive with an example. Along the way, we'll also discuss how to prevent a button from submitting the form. So here is what we want to do. On our create employee form, we want to include a field to capture the photo path of the employee. So when this form initially loads, we want to include this photo path field where the end user can type the path of the photo, and we also want to display this show preview button. So when they click this show preview button, we want to display the preview of the image available at this specified path, and then the text on the button should dynamically change to hide preview. And then when they click this hide preview button, we want to hide the preview of the image, and the text on the button should change back to show preview. The first step is to include the required HTML for the photo path field. It's going to be very similar to this phone number field. So let's copy and paste this HTML, and then we'll change the bits that are required. I'm going to place this HTML just below the date of birth field. Let's change the text on this label to photo path. And along the same lines, let's also change the for attribute of the label, ID of the input field, name, and ng model to photo path. Since we have set the name property of the input field and ng model directive of the input field to photo path, Angular generated form model is going to create a property with the name photo path, and it's going to keep track of what we type into this photo path input field. Notice we have the photo path field as expected, and as we type into this photo path field, notice this photo path property within this Angular generated form model. Whatever we type here is being captured by the Angular auto generated form model. Now we want to include an image element just below this photo path field so it can preview the image available at this specified photo path. So just below the photo path field, let's include the image element. Notice we are setting the image element's height and width to 200 pixels, and we are binding the photo path property to the source property of the image element. Let's save our changes and then take a look at the browser. Notice we have our image element just below the photo path field. Let's launch Browser Developer Tools. Notice we have 404 error on the console tab. We're getting this 404 error because on the initial form load, the photo path property is null, and we are binding that photo path property to the source property of the image element. Since this photo path property is null, we're getting the 404 error. Notice at the moment we only have one 404 error. We can see that one error right here. Now notice what happens as we type into this photo path input field. Every time a character is typed into this photo path input field, we have a 404 error. This is because every time we type into this field, Angular is trying to bind the corresponding property, that is the photo path property, with the source property of the image element, because we have specified that binding right here. Since we have not completed typing a valid photo path, Angular is not able to find a photo at the specified path, and that's the reason we are getting this 404 error. Once we complete typing a valid photo path, we get to see the photo as expected. On our initial form load, we do not want to display the image element. We don't want to render it at all. Only when we click the show preview button, that's when we want to render the image element and then show the preview of the image available at the specified path. So to keep it hidden within our create employee component class, I'm going to create a Boolean property. I'm going to call it preview photo, and I'm going to initialize that to false. Next, in the view template on our image element, I'm going to use the ngif structural directive, and I'm going to set its expression to the Boolean property that we have just created within our component class. So let's set the expression of this ngif structural directive to that Boolean property. Since we have initialize this property to false, when the form initially loads, this image element is not added to the browser DOM, meaning it's not rendered at all. So if the expression is false, this image element will not be rendered. If it is true, only then the image element will be rendered. So on the initial form load, notice we don't have the image element displayed, and as we type into the photo path field, notice we don't have any 404 errors logged to the console. Next, we need this show preview button to show and hide the photo preview. So between the photo path input field and the image element, let's include show preview button. Notice here we're using the bootstrap btn and btn primary button classes for styling. Next, we need to wire up the button click event handler. So when we click this button, we want to call a method on our component class. We don't have this toggle photo preview method yet. We'll create that in just a bit. And notice the syntax right here. We are using parentheses. So this is event binding. We discussed event binding in detail in part 14 of our Angular 2 tutorial. So if you're new to event binding, please check out our Angular 2 course. Now, all we want this toggle photo preview method to do is toggle the value that we have in this preview photo property. Now, we have a typo here. We are missing O. So let's correct the typo. And let's create this method on our component class. So just after the constructor, let's create the toggle photo preview method. And all this method is going to do is toggle the value that we have in preview photo property. So this dot preview photo equals not this dot preview photo. Let's save our changes and take a look at the browser. Notice we have show preview button as expected. So within the photo path property, let's type a valid photo path. So we have this mark.png within the images folder in the assets folder. So if we take a look at our project, notice within the assets folder we have images, and within that we have mark.png. At the moment, we are assuming we already have the employee photo. In our upcoming videos in this series, we'll discuss how to upload files using Angular. For now, let's assume we already have the employee photo and we are just capturing the path using this create employee form. So once we have this valid photo path, when we click show preview, we see the employee photo. And when we click this button again, the preview is hidden. So it's all working as expected, but we have two problems here. And here is the first problem. The text on the button is not changing dynamically. When we don't have the preview, we want the text to be show preview. But when we click it and when we see the preview, we want the text to be hide preview. So when we click on it again, the preview will be hidden. So we want to change the text on the button dynamically, depending on whether the preview is available or not. And then look at this console here. Let's clear out everything that we already have. Now, every time I click the button, notice we're actually logging the Angular generated form model to the console. Notice the code to log the employee form to the console is present in the save employee method. And we are binding the save employee method to the ng submit directive on our form element. So when we submit the form, we want to call the save employee method, passing it the employee form. And at the moment on our form, we only have one submit button, and that is our save button. So notice the type attribute on this button, it is set to submit. So only when we click this save button, we get the form submitted, and then we want the code in save employee method to be executed, which logs the employee form to the console. But every time we are clicking this show preview button, the form is logged to the console, and we don't want that to happen. Notice this again, we clear the console, and every time we click this show preview button, we have it logged to the console. So let's fix this problem first. The reason we have this problem is because the show preview button is behaving as a submit button. And the reason it's behaving as a submit button is because we don't have the type attribute set explicitly. When we don't have the type attribute set explicitly, the button behaves as a submit button. Now we don't want this button to behave as a submit button, so I'm going to set the type attribute explicitly and set it to button. Notice now the show preview button is not behaving as a submit button. Every time we click the button, notice now we don't have the employee form logged to the console. Next, let's fix the text on the button. We want the text on the button to change dynamically depending on whether we have the preview visible or not. To set the text on the button dynamically, we are going to make use of interpolation. So instead of hard coding the text, let's use interpolation and then make use of this property, preview photo. So if the value of this property is true, so let's use ternary operator here. So if the value of preview photo is true, then that means we have the preview available. So at that point, we want to display hide preview on the button. So if this property value is true, it's going to append this text to this text, so we will have hide preview. On the other hand, if the preview is not available, meaning if the value of this property is false, then we want show preview as the text on the button. So let's format the code, save our changes, and then take one final look at the browser. Notice at the moment we don't have the photo preview, so the text on the button is show preview. When we type in a valid photo path and click the button, we have the preview and the text changes to hide preview. When I click the button again, the preview is hidden and the text changed back to show preview. Here is the code that we just discussed. When we click the show preview button, we are calling this toggle photo preview method. And all this method does is toggle the value that we have in preview photo property. And we are using this preview photo property and the ngif structural directive to add or remove the image element from the DOM. We're also using the same property to dynamically set the text on the button. Thank you for listening and have a great day.